live in YouTube. So I'm going to bring up the, you want me to bring up the guidelines now, Rachel, or later now? Perfect. So there we go. For those of you joining us, and this will be the guidelines so that you can provide us your public comment when the time comes.
Okay, so I think we're ready to start. Cindy, if you're ready as well.
Right, I am ready. Everyone can hear me okay?
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Silence. All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for being here. It's good to see everybody again, even though it's virtual, it's still great to see everybody. So welcome aboard. Roll call. Kathy, have you had a chance to do roll call?
Yes.
Great. I don't see you, but I hear you.
Yeah, I know. I took my video off.
Yeah,
Everybody's
okay.
here, actually.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. We've got a full meeting today. There'll be times when we might have to watch the time clock, but we'll let you know when that happens. But first on the agenda, public comment. The public comment in this first section is anything that people want to share with us from the public that's not on the agenda. I believe the committee, we received 3 public comments submitted to us in writing prior to the meeting, and I trust everyone on the committee received that information and had a chance to review. I just want to thank you all for who did contribute the public comment. We have received them, and we will review the information you provided and see where we can go with those comments in the future. Is there anyone present that would like to speak or provide any public comment not on the agenda today? Anyone out in the virtual audience?
If it's okay, Cindy, folks who are attendees, you don't have the option to unmute yourself, but you can raise your hand, and that's the slide we're looking at right now. That's your indication to us that you want to speak. So it looks like we do have somebody there, Juan, if you don't mind.
All right, yeah, we have Malaki Brown.
Hi, good afternoon, folks. How you doing?
Great, thank you so much for being here. And just a quick reminder,
Absolutely,
we'll try to keep the public comments to 3 minutes like we normally do at our live meeting. So thank you, Malachi. Go ahead.
Yeah, of course. I'm so sorry. I assumed that with the question about the live comments or the public questions, I assumed they were gonna be later. I didn't know they were gonna be right now. I wanted to see like if you guys were asking or making comments that I could make comments to in the future. But I would, the one question that I would have at this very moment, there is a new housing project specifically that's going up that just got a new roundabout over off of this new road. And then there's a new up there. I wanted to see what the update was on that. If we had any information from HUD about that project and any sort of date that we were expecting that project to be completed.
So Malachi, I apologize. My the connection, it just cut out when you said a new project by a new roundabout in a new road, but I didn't hear what the road or the roundabout was.
Yeah, so the new roundabout, actually brought a new road in conjunction with Butler Market right there at the Butler Market Road right down the street from Mountain View High School. I noticed, as well as a lot of other community members noticed that nice, beautiful area, but there's also a very attractive looking new project provided and funded by HUD. I wanted to see how that project was going and if we had a specific timeline as far as a closing date or what the status of that one was.
I can answer that if you'd like me to, Cindy. Yeah, okay, so this is Lynn McConnell. Hi, Malachi. I'm the
Hi, Lynn.
local housing manager for this city. I believe the development you're talking about is Canal Commons 1. It's right there kind of next to the new Empire extension that takes you sort of next to Pine Nursery Park and then down to Butler Market. That one actually is expected to get phase 1 certificate of occupancy. So it'll be open this month sometime. There's additional phases, and then they'll actually within this, I don't know how to say this well. There are 2 phases within this first phase. And so, one building will get occupancy hopefully this month. The other one, we're very hopeful we'll get it probably at the beginning of January 2021. And then they just secured additional funding to build the second large phase, which will have another 48 units. That's a little farther out. They haven't started construction on that yet. So I don't have a good timeline, but I would expect it's most likely in 2022 sometime.
Excellent. Awesome. Yeah. Like I said, it looked like a very beautiful project that was going up and got a really nice area. I'm very excited to see that residential area blossom into what it needs to become, especially for the low income housing community. Yeah, I appreciate that. And I want that. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're excited about it as well. Trust us. All right, Juan, do you see any other hands raised? I'm not seeing them, so your help is greatly appreciated.
I do not see any other hands, Chair. So we can do a final reminder for those of you joining us. You're welcome to press the raise hand icon in the middle of your screen if you want to provide comment at this time. Otherwise, I'm not seeing any, Chair, anymore. So
Great.
let's move forward.
Okay, thank you so much. And then later on in the meeting, there'll be a chance for public comment on housing inequity. So if you're here for that, just sit tight and we'll get there. Next on the agenda, approval of the September minutes. Did everyone have a chance to review those? And are there any questions or clarifications that anyone on the committee has? Well, everyone's muted, but no one's mouth is working.
I can move to approve them if you'd like.
Thank you.
I'll second. Second.
Thank you. Thank you. All in favor, I can see the committee now. If you raise your hand, I will state your name as in favor so we can get that for the record. And I'm just going to go in order on my screen. So
I'm not hearing anything. Is Cindy talking?
Yes, she is.
How weird. I suddenly have no sound.
Don't check out yet. All right, we'll wait for Kathy. Can you hear anything yet, Kathy?
Kathy, you're on mute.
Maybe what we could do is have Juan work with Kathy a little bit while we sort of proceed, if that's okay. And then Juan, do you mind maybe?
I'm good now. For some reason,
okay.
I don't know what happened. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, so we'll vote to approve the minutes. So if you raise your hand, I can see you, and we're going to test my name skills here because it just says committee member. So in favor, Matt Martino and Priscilla Buck. Thank you, Priscilla. Allison?
I didn't get to read them. I'll abstain. Sorry.
Okay, Allison abstains. I see a committee member, but I can't see the screen very well. Ian Schmidt. There you are. Heather Simmons. Thank you. Joanna Gardner. Hi there. I got Allison, Priscilla, Kathy Austin, and Keith Wooden. Oh, that's who you are. Okay, now I know what you look like on screen. And then Cindy King, yes, okay. All in approval and one abstain from Allison. All right, so next on our agenda is I'm going to give Rachel the floor here in a second, is an SDZ exemption for core Cressida cottages. And before we get into that, I would like to declare and go through the committee if there are any potential or actual conflicts of interest. So what I'll do, if the answer is yes or no, I'm going to call each one of you and you can state if you think you have an actual or potential or no conflict of interest. So Matt Martino, you're first.
Sorry, my notes just went down. I have a potential conflict of interest as I may be working with them in the future for any potential financing options that their clients may come across or need.
Great, thank you. Kathy Austin.
I have no conflicts.
Thank you. Priscilla Buck.
I have no conflicts.
Ian Schmidt.
I have no conflicts.
Keith Wooden.
I have a potential conflict.
Okay. Allison Hongarten.
Wait. Can we go back? Sorry.
Yeah.
Keith, can you go through that a little bit more? Just give us some detail on what that potential conflict might be.
Oh, we work with Core as partners on these transactions, and so we are a partner with them, not necessarily on this deal, but we have partnered with them in the past, and we may partner with them in the future.
I'm guessing that Elizabeth would like me to next ask if your compensation or position are in any way affected by your vote on this next step.
Absolutely not.
Okay. How'd I do,
And who
Elizabeth?
is we, Keith? Just to clarify.
Say that again.
Who you use the pronoun we, and I'm just asking if you can clarify what entity you're referring to.
Oh, Housing Works and Core.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Elizabeth. We like the attention to detail. Allison Hohengarten.
Yes. I have a potential conflict. Our law firm does some work for Core.
Okay, Elizabeth, is that specific enough for the purposes of this?
I think so. I think the same question that Lynn asked to Keith may be appropriate. Is any of your compensation related to your work on this committee and in association with Core?
No.
Thank you.
Thank you. Joanna Gardner.
I don't have any conflicts.
Thank you. I feel like I'm missing someone. Ian, I got you. Heather Simmons.
No conflict.
Great. And then Cindy King, I do not foresee a conflict at all with this project. So with that in mind, Rachel, you have the floor. If you can do an intro for us, that would be fabulous.
All right, did we get all the committee members? I just want to make sure.
I think so.
Okay. So this Cressida project is something that we funded for land acquisition about a year ago now. And so this is at 2500 Northeast 8th Street. It will be 5 units, and 4 out of those units will be at or available for households at 80% AMI or below. The water SDC for each potential unit is $5,578. For each unit, sewer is $4,974. And for each unit, transportation is $8,136. And for each unit for Bend Parks and Recreation is $8,594. The total of all of those individually is $27,282 each. And the total of 4 units, all SDC charges would be an exemption for $109,128. Any questions from the committee? Please raise your hand. I can see you.
Quickly now, these, there's just 4 units out of 5 that they're asking for the SDC exemption because the 5th one does not apply, correct?
Correct.
And then for the parks, these 4 units for the parks, is that part of our 200 units with the parks that they are agreeing to exempt during this biennium? Or is this in addition to?
Nope, this falls within that cap.
Okay. I thought so. I thought so. Just was seeing how they were doing.
This would leave us with 20 additional units to be exempted in the future from parks.
Okay. Great. All right, any other questions from the committee? Great. So
hands raised in the chat. So
okay. And I'm not seeing those, so I must have my screen a little off, but I'll fix that later. So next would be if anyone would like to propose to make a motion.
Do each of these bullets need to be a separate motion under?
Yes, one's for the city, one's for Parks and Rec.
Okay. So I move to exempt core community land trusts affordable housing units within Cressida Cottages from pending City of Bend system development charges of $74,752 and to authorize staff to take all actions necessary to complete such exemptions, including signing loan agreements and related documents without further approval. If exemptions are not exercised before any expected increase, the increase will be added to the total exemption.
Seconded.
Any additional discussion or questions about that? All right. We'll take a vote on that and then we'll do the next motion for the Parks and Rec. So all in favor of, I'm sorry, just heard some static. All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
All right, I will go through my screen. Matt Martino? Aye. Kathy Austin is an aye. Priscilla Buck?
Aye.
Aye. Heather Simmons?
Aye.
Joanna Gardner? Allison Hohengarten?
Aye.
Ian Schmidt?
Aye.
Cindy King is an aye. Keith Wooden?
Aye.
And I think that is everyone, and no nays. All right. Motion passes. So would anyone like to move a motion for the Parks and Rec SDCs?
I move to recommend the Bend Park and Recreation District Executive Director or designee exempt core community land trusts affordable housing units within Cressida Cottages from pending Bend Parks and Rec District system development charges of $34,376.00. If exemptions are not exercised before any expected increase, the increase will be added to the total exemption.
Seconded.
Any additional discussion or deliberations? All right, we'll go for a vote. All in favor, please raise your hand. I have Priscilla Buck, yay.
Yay. Aye.
Yeah, thank you. Kathy Austin? Yes. Matt Martino? Yes. Heather Simmons? Yes. Joanna Gardner? Yes. Allison?
Yes.
Yes. Keith Wooden?
Yes.
Thank you. Ian Schmidt? Yes.
Yes.
And Cindy King, yes, I believe that is everyone. If I missed anyone, please say something. I think that's everyone. Thank you very much. All right. Corey, you're doing some exciting things out there. Thank you so much. I am going to hand the floor to Rachel. She's going to introduce the next topic, fair housing and jurisdictions. And I just quickly want to thank Louise Dix and Sam Goldberg for being here today. I appreciate your time, and I feel like you're going to provide us some really good information this afternoon. So Rachel, please continue.
I just want to introduce Louise and Sam and thank them for being here as well. Louise has been with Fair Housing Council for a number of years, and before that, she did a lot of community development block grant work and affordable housing work in Gresham and other communities. She has been a stalwart in Oregon for many years, and we are greatly appreciative of her being here and giving us this information today. And Sam is new to Fair Housing Sam Goldberg is new to Fair Housing Council of Oregon, and we just want to welcome him and hope that we'll see him for many more years to come. Take it away, Louise.
Okay, well, great. Thanks, Rachel. It's really nice to talk with you all again. Some of you I think I've met before at council meetings and so on in the past. So we're also really fortunate to have Alan Lazo, our executive director, here today. We've been trying to get Alan out in the state and away from Portland, and this seemed like an opportune time to do that so he could get to know folks in Bend. And he will be available to help answer questions at the end of our presentation. A little more about Sam. Sam, you can queue up while I'm talking, okay? He's going to start us out with the history of housing discrimination in Oregon with some information about Bend too, thanks to Rachel. We've got some history and information about Bend. And Sam is instrumental in terms of dealing with our virtual bus tours. I don't know if you're aware that we do this bus tour, very popular in Portland, and we haven't been able to do it because of COVID. And so we've been making it virtual. And so it'll be available hopefully very soon. It's very exciting. So, and Sam's kind of the point person for that. So I'm gonna give it to you, Sam, and he's gonna start out and then I'll take it halfway through, okay?
Yeah, thank you very much for having me here. I'm Sam Goldberg. I'm the program assistant at the Fair Housing Council of Oregon. So in addition to this kind of stuff, I also manage our annual Fair Housing poster contest. So our well-known posters done by 1st through 8th graders that we do every year, that's through me. So if you're looking for this year's, you can feel free to email me. I'll manage the information at fhco.org email, so I'd be happy to get some of those sent out to you. All right, so we're going to be talking about affirmatively furthering fair housing and kind of the history of how the rules came about and the history of fair housing law as it relates to zoning. So yeah, we've got a short history of land use and development, how our communities became segregated in the first place, which is deeply tied to the history of zoning. The roles and responsibilities of jurisdiction under the Fair Housing Act, the impact of the AFFH rules and where we are today, and what citizens can do in their community to further fair housing. So what is fair housing? It's not landlord-tenant law. It is the set of federal, state, and local civil rights laws that protect individuals based on their membership in a protected class from individual or systemic discrimination in housing transactions. And that applies at every level, from landlords to bankers to jurisdictions. Everyone who touches the housing market in any way, any kind of housing transaction, fair housing laws do apply to them. The proactive elimination of segregation and promotion of equal opportunity access to housing is through this affirmatively furthering fair housing rule, which is part of the Fair Housing Act. So we'll get into that, the specifics of that a little bit later on. But first, the protected classes under federal fair housing law are race, color, national origin, religion, and those were added in those were the original protected groups in 1968. In the 70s, we added gender to that. And in 1988, familial status for families with children under 18 and disability. And then in Oregon, we have our own set of protected classes. Marital status is protected, source of income, and that includes Section 8 and housing choice vouchers. Sexual orientation and gender identity, that is protected at the state level. It's not under the Federal Fair Housing Act. And then there are also some local ordinances. Different communities have different protections as well. Louise, did you have any examples of those?
Well,
in
in the Portland area, Multnomah County, age and occupation are protected. In a lot of areas where there's universities, age is a protected class because of students.
Right.
So, and then they are responsible, the jurisdictions are responsible to enforce that. It's not a federal or a state enforcement in that case.
All right, so in Oregon, as we are increasingly aware and are reminded, we are an overwhelmingly white state compared to the rest of the West Coast. 87.4% white, 12.8% Hispanic or Latino, and then a very small African American, Native American population, somewhat larger Asian population compared to other parts of the region. But how did we get here? Because this was not by accident. So pre-white settling, we had various indigenous peoples living all over Oregon. There's a great map that you can see on your screen that shows where all the different tribes lived and just how many of them there were. 80% of that population was decimated by disease, some which reached here even before white settlers did, and then wars with the settlers once they came here. And then Oregon as a territory and as a state has a long history of legal discrimination. So African Americans were excluded from living here and punished by lash laws. Those were in the 1844 and 1849 Oregon territory laws. So that included, not just Oregon, but Washington, Idaho, part of Montana, part of Wyoming when it was the larger territory. And those lash laws literally meant if you were a Black person and you were in Oregon, you were going to be whipped until you left. And I think it was, every 40 days, I believe, until you left, you were going to be punished this way. And then in 1859, Oregon was the only state that was admitted as a free state, so slavery was not allowed, but it still had that African American exclusion embedded in the Constitution. That was not eliminated from the Constitution until 1927, and the language was not removed until this century. It was still in the Constitution. In addition to African Americans, Chinese and Japanese were not allowed to own real estate. So this is the section of the Oregon State Constitution that includes that lash law provision, as well as the barring of people of Chinese origin from owning any property. Oregon was known as the most segregated state north of Mason-Dixon. And that really expressed itself in the Klan membership in Oregon. Oregon had the largest KKK per capita in the nation in the 1920s, more than 60 active Klaverns, and 35,000 members in 1923. So just a huge representation of Klan. You can see one of those pictures, there's people in full Klan robes with the Portland police and mayor. That's in that lower left-hand corner. So they were very much perceived as a legitimate part of the community. And thanks to the fine people in Bend, we were given some of this material. This is a clip from the Bend Bulletin, which talks about Klan activities in Bend in 1923. This is some of the history of the KKK in Bend. Edie Gilson, Bend mayor from 21 to 22, is listed as a local KKK representative. And in Bend, membership peaked at 320 members. And then there's an interesting story about it losing its charter and being disbanded, which I think is in, yeah, this is the news clipping about that. So in the mid-20s, the Klan kind of reached its political zenith. They were able to get a lot of their political goals passed, including the most restrictive immigration law we ever had. That was kind of the peak of their political aspirations. And then a combination of being a victim of their own success and also a lot of internal corruption kind of caused the Klan membership to splinter at that point. And that's exactly what happened in Bend, where various different factions kind of split it apart. But that is not to say that they had not accomplished their goals at that point. So we also have a pretty ugly history in Oregon as far as the Japanese population. So as of after Pearl Harbor, the Japanese in Oregon had come after the Chinese Exclusion Act. So we really see a boom in the late 19th century of Japanese immigration into Oregon. And then we had the Alien Land Law, which did not allow foreign-born Japanese to own property in Oregon. What you saw a lot at that time was the purchasing of land in the name of their children who had been born here. So as of 1941, there were 4,000 Japanese in Oregon. The largest community was actually in Hood River, where they made up 4% of the population, largely because of their representation in agriculture. Portland also had a Japantown. If you're familiar with Portland, it is now what is Old Town Chinatown. So it's a big part of downtown. And then after 1941, we had Executive Order 9066, which pushed all people of Japanese ancestry basically to the east of La Grande. So everyone who was from the west side of the state were all pushed to the east side of the state. 120,000 lost their homes, and 2/3 of them were actually US citizens. They were not Japanese citizens. This was what was happening in Bend at the time. You see, this is actually about the African-American population in Bend, the mobile USO units. Okay, here we go. Bend Council seeks new quarters for colored boys to be stationed in mid-state. So this is an insistence that Black GIs who were coming into Oregon during World War II, that they would be housed separately from the rest of the communities. There are a lot of stories at this time where German and Italian prisoners of war in Central and Eastern Oregon were apparently treated better by the townspeople than Black GIs who were actually fighting for the US Army. So it's definitely a deeply entrenched part of the history here. So Now we're going to get into kind of government policies from that time and how that really furthered and cemented a lot of that racial history. From the 1940s to the 1980s, institutional policies solidified segregation, including FHA appraisal standards, VA loan policies, transportation improvements, urban renewal/removal, and white flight, all of which came directly from government policies, which we're going to get into. So we'll start with redlining. The process of rating a neighborhood for stability using the presence of people of color or new immigrants as major factors for deeming a neighborhood unsuitable. So this comes out of both the professionalization of the realtor market, as well as the federal government's increasing role in backing mortgages. So the way that risk was determined was entirely geographically based, and unsurprisingly, those lines, those geographic borders of what were going to be risky home loans and what were going to be safe home loans were overwhelmingly based on the race of the people who lived there. The redlining of neighborhoods, predominantly communities of color, led to extreme racial inequities in FHA loans. As it says, between 1934 and 1962, $120 billion in loans were made by the FHA. Less than 2% went to non-whites. So this is the program that kind of created the American middle class as we know it today, home ownership being the single greatest source of wealth for American families, and it was almost entirely deprived from non-white populations in the United States. The other ways that segregation was entrenched was through the process of restrictive covenants, which prevented the owner of real estate to sell or transfer property to Blacks or other racial minorities or various religions. And so that's literally in the deeds of your house. If you own an older home, something that's 1930s or older, if you look at the deed, chances are that language is still in there. There's definitely a good chance that it will say, not for this in perpetuity, this cannot be sold to Blacks, Jews, Chinese, whoever. The Supreme Court declared these restrictive covenants unenforceable in Shelley in 1948. However, because it was deemed a private transaction, it was still enforced for another 20 years. And then we have to look at how zoning fosters segregation. Zoning, from the start, zoning is separated more than just land uses. It is also separated people. So we're going to see a little video clip of that in just a second. And in the early 20th century, when zoning was coming about, many communities explicitly use those ordinances to segregate neighborhoods. And so we've got a quick little video that will give you an idea of that.
Zoning is a way for communities to separate land by use or form. For example, an area could be dedicated to commercial or industrial use, or there could be a restriction on how many housing units can be built. Zoning shapes the places where we live, but it also shapes our lives. Local zoning regulations determine where we can find housing, schools, and parks, and who gets to use them. Policymakers initially created zoning codes to protect public health. For example, to stop residents from getting sick from living too close to factories. But from the start, zoning has separated more than just land uses. It has also separated people. In the early 20th century, many communities explicitly used zoning ordinances to racially segregate neighborhoods, effectively declaring that different skin colors were as incompatible as a family's home and a smokestack. By the late 20th century, civil rights legislation outlawed overt housing discrimination. But those explicit racial barriers were quickly replaced by subtler methods. Even today, exclusionary zoning policies that restrict lower cost or higher density housing limit racial and economic diversity and raise housing costs. By driving up housing costs, restrictive zoning can exclude people from equal access to public resources, like schools and parks, and leave lower income workers unable to afford housing close to available jobs. When regions are more economically and racially segregated, everyone loses. Local economies see slower growth, and residents of all races are less upwardly mobile. And finally, despite being created to protect public health, zoning often pushes multifamily buildings closer to highways in areas with higher concentrations of air pollutants. As a result, low-income people and people of color are more likely to live in places that could make them sick. It doesn't have to be this way. When done thoughtfully, zoning can connect people and places, not divide us. Communities across the United States are beginning to re-examine the role of zoning and change the restrictive zoning rules, opening neighborhoods to multifamily housing, walkable densities, and more. For more information and resources, and to find out what other communities are doing to improve their zoning policies, go to urban.org/zoning.
All right, so because, you know, the life of a building, the life of a map is not just, you know, 1 or 5 years, it's 20, 50, 100 years. There are a lot of continuing impacts today. Just because redlining in legal terms does not exist anymore, it still has very long lasting impacts. And so it continues to restrict lower cost or higher density housing and limits racial and economic diversity. And that raises housing costs and excludes people from equal access to opportunities. The kind of, you know, source book for us for the last few years has been this one, Richard Rothstein's The Color of Law, A Forgotten History of How Our Government Segregated America. And it's a really important piece of work because it really punches a hole in the narrative that segregation is natural, that people of different races, ethnicities, religion are just naturally going to end up, you know, completely separated, segregated in their own neighborhood. It is very much, you know, by design and entrenched by government policies. Which is how we get to the Fair Housing Act. So in 1968, the Fair Housing Act was enacted. It was, of those 60 civil rights laws, by far the hardest to pass. Harder than voting rights, harder than the first Civil Rights Act. That's, you know, largely because it affected northern cities, not just southern cities, breaking down where the housing segregation really was. HUD was named to enforce the fair housing laws, and penalties were instituted for violation. And this concept of affirmatively furthering fair housing was that rule and that language was put in that initial Fair Housing Act. And so that's where I'm going to hand things off to Louise.
Okay, so you can stop sharing and I'll share. Okay. Okay, where am I? Over here. And current slide. There we go. Oops. That's not right. I don't know why it did that. We'll go through real quick. Sorry about that, folks. And of course, my dogs both came in at this time to bother me. So hopefully they will leave me alone. Do this. Oops. Okay, so Sam talked about affirmatively furthering fair housing. It's in the Fair Housing Act when it was adopted in 1968. And it means that jurisdictions that receive community development block grant, for instance, any other kind of federal housing and community development funding, they're held to a higher standard in terms of their obligations. They have to be proactive in their efforts to promote fair housing. And so this AFFH addresses the removal of barriers to fair housing choice and also creates ways to access housing choice and access to opportunity. What it's all about is creating inclusive communities that have equal access to opportunities and amenities such as parks and schools and so on. So these are some of the barriers to equal opportunity, of course, that we look at to determine if it's being met in a community. Education, including school performance, test scores, et cetera, free and reduced lunch. Economic development, taking a look at your land use policies and zoning decisions and incentives for affordable housing. Economic health, like job opportunities, making sure you don't have food deserts, grocery stores, publicly funded infrastructure. And accessibility of housing, making sure that your housing is near transportation and services, is barrier-free, meets design and construction, and also location, making sure that your housing is available and accessible in all different parts of your city and has all kinds of different, accessible features. And looking at special considerations, of course, again, for group homes and so on. This was a recent remark from President Trump that he said he was happy to inform all of the people living their suburban lifestyle dream that you will no longer be bothered or financially hurt by having low-income housing built in your neighborhood. Your housing prices will go up based on the market and crime will go down. Well, first of all, that's a stereotype. It's been proven that affordable housing does not create a lowering of housing prices and so on. But this is about the, you might have heard that they had taken away affirmatively furthering fair housing. It's not taken away. It was just a piece of it that HUD was doing is no longer there. So it doesn't mean it's not required. It still is. What it means is there's less accountability required of jurisdictions around the examination of their racial concentration and their concentration of poverty. They no longer have to prove that they're making huge steps to get rid of those concentrations and so on. It was initially suspended in 2018, and it didn't really have a lot of impact on jurisdictions. We talked to the ones in Oregon, and most of them had decided to go through and do their assessment of fair housing as a kind of a hybrid and work on measurements to make sure they were accountable on this thing. So it didn't really have a lot of impact. So what we're talking about with fair housing in jurisdictions is when they're being held to fair housing, they're subject to fair housing in a number of areas. We're primarily going to look at land use and zoning issues, but they also have to make sure that their occupancy standards aren't too rigid, that they're granting reasonable accommodations for things like parking, or it could be that maybe a city wants to do a pit bull ordinance. If they have a pit bull ordinance, they got to make sure that they are allowing reasonable accommodations for those people that have that breed of dog and need it as an emotional support or assistance animal. So code enforcement is also an area that fair housing looks at. But today, like I said, we're going to focus on the land use and zoning issues. So fair housing prohibits land use regulations and restrictive covenants, conditional or special use permits that may limit someone's housing choice based on their protected class. And Sam mentioned the protected classes. Every one of us is a member of at least one protected class. So it's civil rights that's protecting all of us in any kind of housing transaction. Some of the land use violations that we see might be requiring projects to undergo additional approval steps or hearings or meetings with neighbors that's not required of for other housing projects. And I'm talking about here primarily affordable housing projects requiring them to take different steps, or maybe it might be a group home or something like that. Another one would be requiring projects to have extra screening or setbacks or design modifications that you don't require for other housing projects, and then also requiring burdensome public safety requirements, thinking that this is going to create more crime and that they need to provide more public safety. So actually, HUD and the Department of Justice released a joint statement on group homes, local land use, and fair housing in August of 1999, and it was later updated in November of 2016. And what that ruling went to is talking about prohibiting or restricting the development of housing based on the belief that a resident have a particular protected characteristics such as race, disability, or family status. And an example of that would be a moratorium on the development of multifamily housing because of concerns that residents will include those people with those protected class characteristics. It's going to be more of those people, single women with children, or people with disabilities, or people of different races or ethnicities. So that's restricted. Imposing restrictions on housing because of alleged public safety concerns based on stereotypes about residents or anticipated residents who might be going to live there who have protected characteristics. Example of this would be requiring a proposed development to provide additional security measures based on the belief that persons with a particular protected characteristics are more likely to engage in criminal activity. Refusing to provide reasonable accommodations to land use or zoning policies when such accommodations may be necessary to allow people with disabilities to have an equal opportunity to use and enjoy the housing. So this might be something like denying a request to modify a setback requirement so an accessible sidewalk or ramp can be provided for somebody with a mobility disability. So those are the kinds of things that would be red flags that we would be looking for when we take a look at what's happening in jurisdictions. And what we're finding more and more of is a lot of projects that are receiving NIMBY, not my backyard. It's raised its head again. It's happening more and more, and we'll talk about that a little more later. Let's talk a little bit about disparate impact, and it's a defense for fair housing. It's a practice that results in a disproportionate impact on a certain group of people, or it creates, increases, reinforces or perpetuates segregated housing patterns because of protected classes like the race, color, religion, sex, handicap, familial status, national origin. This was originally passed, it was upholding 45 years of precedent. It was passed by the Supreme Court in 2015. And it was a specific, it was Department of Housing, which is like our Oregon Housing and Community Services, versus a nonprofit called Inclusive Communities. And what was happening is the State Department was locating their tax increment financing and some of their other low affordable housing in various areas that were already full of affordable housing. So not spreading it out. So examples of policies that might have a disparate impact would be if you had a local zoning ordinance that restricted housing with more than 3 bedrooms. The result would be a disparate impact on people with larger families, so familial status. Other things that might have a disparate impact that we're seeing is urban renewal, code enforcement, any kind of exclusionary zoning, and residency preferences. So we often talk with developers about residency preferences, and if you know of somebody that is looking at doing a preferences for different folks, they can get a hold of us and we can help them decide if it's going to be a discriminatory thing. So HUD, this is new. They released a ruling, and this has been in the news, and that's what also President Trump was referring to. They released a rule which kind of weakens the disparate impact defense. It doesn't take it away. It makes it more difficult to use in legal cases against perpetrators of housing discrimination. But it's still there, and it's a Supreme Court ruling, and it's still upheld at this point. So affordable housing and fair housing, what's the similarity? What's the nexus here? What's the connection? It's really that many people with protected class characteristics live in affordable housing. So we're talking about people with disabilities. We're talking about, again, single women with children, different races, different colors. They are all in affordable housing more. And what we're talking about in Oregon, because what I find is people don't see this a lot in certain areas of Oregon because they don't see a lot of people of color or different nationalities. And so we talk about racial segregation or residential segregation based on income. And we talk about the other side of the tracks. And income would be a proxy for race and ethnicity in many cases. Some people seem to get that we don't want to segregate people by income. We don't want low income areas of our communities and so on. And this gets us into the Goal 10 and housing needs analysis and land use planning, and we'll talk about what that is. So you're probably all familiar with Planning Goal 10. And what this is about, it's one of the I don't know how many planning goals now, but it's one of the main ones to provide for housing needs of the citizens. And it really, we're really getting into it with a lot of jurisdictions now, making sure that they're addressing their goal 10 when they look at putting in a development. But it's buildable lands for residential use shall be inventoried, and plans shall encourage the availability of adequate numbers of needed housing units at price ranges and rent levels which are commensurate with the financial capabilities of Oregon households and allow for flexibility of housing location, type, and density. So really, this is the whole spirit of the planning goal 10 is to create inclusive communities with a mix of housing types, a mix of affordability types, and so on throughout a community. Ooh, what happened there? That's weird. Okay. All right. So a housing needs analysis is something that a city needs to consider to meet its housing needs over a 20-year period. And they define it, Department of Land Conservation Development defines it as a product and a process that a city goes through that to determine areas of need in their inventory of housing and their buildable lands. And so you have to link your goal 10 back to your housing needs analysis. We have a project that we've been doing since 2015, and it's a collaboration between us and the Housing Land Advocates, which is a nonprofit that is promoting affordable housing throughout the state. This project's been funded by Oregon Housing and Consumer Services and Oregon Business Development and HUD. And what we do is we review what they call post-acknowledgement plan amendments, which go to LCD. And we get them and we ask for staff reports and we review everybody's reports to make sure that they are meeting their statewide planning goal 10 findings. And if they don't, then we're saying, wait a minute, you gotta take a look at this and make sure that you're meeting your goal 10 and that you're addressing all of this. And we found, at least in the last year, people have really come on board across the state. Even small jurisdictions are really taking it to heart and addressing goal 10. And really taking a good close look at this and making sure that they are meeting their goal 10 obligations. So the project goals were to protect and promote affordable housing by reminding local governments of their goal 10 obligations and when necessary, preserving error in the record for appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals. So it gives us an opportunity to have standing and to take a case forward if we need to. It's also to raise awareness of goal 10 requirements. And I think we've been very successful at that. And also to determine whether a PAPA's adoption would violate the Fair Housing Act by discriminating against protected classes through disparate impact. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the state land use issues that have come up in the last couple of years, because we're also looking at those from a fair housing lens. And the one that you all probably are most familiar with recently is the Senate Bill 1051. And which legalized accessory dwelling units. And so for a couple of years, we were looking at making sure that when communities were putting in their accessory dwelling units, they weren't making them so that they weren't affordable by forcing them to have on-site parking or forcing that the owner had to live nearby or whatever. So we were working with the state and hoping that we could strengthen those clear and objective standards. And it also was, this Senate Bill 1051 also expedited permitting for affordable housing by right on land owned by religious organizations, and it dealt with density as entitlement, looking at density. House Bill, this is a newer one in 2019, is the Missing Middle Housing Bill 2001. And for cities over 25,000 in metro jurisdictions where they have to allow a duplex, of course, on each lot that allows a single family home. Also triplexes, cottage clusters, townhomes in an area that allows for detached single family homes. And the deadline for this, to accomplish this and put it in their code, is June 30th, 2022. This is another one that had to do with regional housing needs analysis. It's House Bill 2003. It's a one-time analysis of regional housing needs and housing shortages, report to the legislature, including a review of this as a policy. And that's coming up, I think it was supposed to be 2021, the deadline, the second one, but the deadline was last month. So And then housing production strategies was a third one with 2003, where cities have to do a housing production strategy within 1 year of completing their housing needs analysis. And this is really important because a lot of folks hadn't updated their housing needs analysis for 25 or 30 years or more. So this is making it something that has to happen, has to be updated and so on. And same with Metro in the Portland area, they have to update their HNA every 6 years. So this regional housing needs analysis has to include a racial equity needs analysis, a distribution methodology for total housing units by affordability level that addresses the historic underproduction of high income jurisdictions, and a definition of equitable distribution of publicly supported housing that increases housing choice for people earning low incomes. So what can you do to promote inclusive communities? Well, a lot of what we're seeing, like I said, seems to be some NIMBY response to not just affordable housing, but group homes for people with mental health issues or addiction and so on. And so I think you all received a copy of our Good Neighbor Guide. It's brand new, hot off the press. I can show you a copy here. Get that out to folks so they understand what this is all about. Planning is really complicated, but this really helps, I think, clarify this and the reasons for fair housing. And our goal really is to create, and I think we all agree, our values are here, that we want more inclusive communities. We want everyone to have access to opportunities like we do, close to parks, close to schools, and so on, and close to jobs and transportation. So familiarize yourself with our Finding Common Ground Inclusive Communities Toolkit, which you can find on our website, and watch for projects and developments, and you guys see them all, look at your committee, and provide a heads up if you need assistance, if there's NIMBYism involved. Provide testimony at public hearings in support of shelters and supportive housing and group homes, as well as zoning changes, providing more multifamily housing. So communicate with your jurisdiction about their fair housing responsibilities, including occupancy standards. We use the Keating Memorandum, which is through HUD, and that's a best practice of 2 people per bedroom plus 1 additional person. There's also an international building code thing. Most communities are following this pretty well. Code enforcement needs to be citywide and equitable, not focusing solely on rental properties or on multifamily properties or on certain neighborhoods. And reasonable accommodations, looking at policies for accommodations with people with disabilities. Examples would be parking certain vehicles where they would not otherwise be prohibited, ordinances not permitting certain dog breeds, etc. And then compliance with the Fair Housing Act design and construction standards, which not everyone knows about, but there are design and construction standards that are not commonly, they're not out there, but we have tested in Portland in the last couple of years to make sure that they were, with all the new development, they were following these. So how to equalize opportunity in the communities, know the fair housing protected classes. You guys know now, and address those NIMBY attitudes, and watch out for red flag language saying that this is not compatible with the existing neighborhood, or this would change the character of the neighborhood. Because what we're saying is that there's reasons, and we're talking primarily like single family, we're going to see a lot of changes in the next few years with density and with changes in zoning around single family. And I know people are going to be very uncomfortable with this, and they're going to say this is going to change the neighborhood, the whole character. But the point is, we want to change the exclusionary situation that we currently are in, where people don't have access to opportunities. And consider the location of key infrastructure and economic development projects, making sure those happen in all neighborhoods. And consider the location and availability of affordable housing in all housing types throughout the community. We really look at that. And one of the things that was happening with this new assessment of fair housing that HUD has now pulled back on is they would have maps to show you where your affordable housing was in your community. So you could get a handle on making sure that you weren't putting all your affordable housing in one part of your city. Promote housing that's structurally accessible to people with disabilities, address issues related to zoning for residential care facilities, offer incentives for mixed use and affordable housing, and I know you do. Promote public transportation routes in all neighborhoods, and don't limit siting of new affordable housing development along existing transit lines. Ensure that economic development, housing opportunities are related to transit in diverse communities, and that public infrastructure is connected to low-income housing. Consider access to employment in all neighborhoods. Ensure land use policies encourage diversity and foster access to grocery stores in low-income neighborhoods. That's pretty much it. We are here to take questions from you and would be glad to do so. The best way to get a hold of us is we do have a housing provider hotline, and we have a regular hotline, which is extension 2. You see the 800 number there. And the housing provider hotline is extension 5. Best way to get a hold of us is information@fhco.org. And Sam monitors that, and he sends the question or the comments or whatever to the people that would best be able to address them. And the website is down below. We have a wealth of information on our website, so please feel free to take a look at that as well. So with that, I would entertain questions. I will stop the share.
Louise, thank you so much. And I really appreciate all of that information and your presentation, and Sam, you as well. Thank you for the time, and a lot of research went into that. So we very much appreciate it. I see some hands raised. So Kathy Austin, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me okay? I've been having some problems. Okay. Well, I think that we have a problem here in Bend in a recent decision made by a majority of the city council with regard to micro units in our city, and that they have limited them to not be in the residential, standard residential or low residential, and only in neighborhood commercial of our standard residential. And I wrote, of course, in support of being throughout all of the standard residential, because that's the largest amount of area in our town that's zoned. And I personally feel it's against our goal 10. And I don't know if there's anything, anybody else feels that way, or if there's anything that we can do about it, but I'm really angry about the decision. And I would like to get your opinion on that, if you're familiar with it, or Lynn could maybe fill you in more.
Actually, I viewed the video of the September, I think 19th session where micro units was brought up by council. I wasn't able to attend the hearing, and I'm waiting for that to come out on video so I can watch that. But it was interesting because at the council meeting, people did remark on the need to have it be more in more neighborhoods and throughout the city, and that it might be a fair housing violation if they didn't do that. So I'm not sure where it is right now. They hadn't taken a vote at that time, so I'm not sure what they really voted on at this point, if they did a vote to just limit it to certain areas or what. But yeah, they seemed like they were heading in the right direction. So it's not good that they might have changed that.
Well, Lynn can jump in, but my understanding is they did in fact vote to limit it. And I think it's wrong, frankly, so.
Lynn, where are you? Why don't you speak up?
I'm here. Yeah, so it was a tough decision, I think, and we do have a couple counselors on this meeting that are, I see one with a hand up, so maybe if it's okay, Cindy, we could go to Barb next. Currently, yes, Kathy was correct at the hearing. They did remove it from our RS standard residential zoning unless it's part of a neighborhood commercial development. The initial sort of fair housing issue was with the central area, which right now are HUD designated low income census tracts. And so that was a pretty clear, I think, indication that could not be the limitation for those, even if all the other factors, make sense. But the removal from RS was a decision that I think they made after a lot of public comment about compatibility and other things like that.
Interesting. So I don't know can we unmute Alan Lazo, because he might have some comments on this. I don't know who's
Juan,
unmuted.
that's the other Fair Housing Council of Oregon. Oh,
Yep.
It looks like Juan may have just moved him over.
Good, because he can, we were just talking about this earlier before this call. And I wasn't really sure where you'd gone with it for sure, but it's, yeah. So maybe Alan can help speak up on this. Are you there, Alan?
Yeah, thanks, Louise. Thanks for having me here today. And I don't know that we can speak specifically to what has happened there with regard to those micro units, but I think as Louise pointed out in her presentation, the goals around creating inclusive communities includes making sure that we create opportunities for all different housing types and all different types of folks in different parts of our communities. So that, the evaluation as to whether or not a decision like that is a violation, an actual violation of the Fair Housing Act, is a pretty complicated evaluation. And it really is a statistical evaluation as to whether or not there might be impacts under the Fair Housing Act. Certainly for a lot of folks that are on committees like this, members of the public that are concerned about how our communities are developing, there are concerns that are raised about whether or not it's creating the kinds of communities that we would like to see that are more inclusive. So there's that kind of gap between the desire for that from communities and it rising to the level of a fair housing violation. But certainly the concepts and the public policies around affirmatively furthering around inclusive communities are important considerations in how we are creating the communities that we want to move forward with. And I think we see that very dynamic in a lot of places right now, not only with the ADUs and micro units, but with the upcoming, as Louise covered, the middle housing that's going to start coming forward, how we're allocating, regulated affordable housing under the regional housing needs analyses and some of those other pieces. So these are conversations that are going to continue and going to be much more in depth moving forward. So I think we'll have opportunities to continue to revisit those in your communities.
But yeah, as Alan said, it would be a difficult argument. I mean, I understand your concerns on this, but it would be a disparate impact kind of argument. We'd have to look at the statistics of everything to make a case that they aren't doing the right thing or whatever. I'm sorry that they didn't make it broader, but it's a really hard thing to figure out. So.
Yeah, and I think
as Alan said, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think a committee like this, can help bring forward that community vision that says, even if this didn't rise to the level of a Fair Housing Act violation, it may not fit with what we want to see in our communities around creating opportunities for lots of different members of our community to access opportunity. And if that action didn't create that, again, it might not fit those concepts that you all are working so hard on to shape your community.
Thank you, Alan. Barb, did you have your hand raised, or did you want to speak? I didn't want to miss you.
Thank you so much, Cindy. I did have my hand raised. I just had my hand raised to say hello to Louise and how every year this presentation, Sam, you did such an exceptional job this year. Every time it's astonishing. Every time it's horrifying to hear again the troubled past of our state. And so that was really the only reason I had my hand up, was to ask if this presentation is available, if that's on your website.
We don't normally, although it's been taped today, as I understand it, but normally we don't. We like to have a little bit of control over our materials and so on. So, but yeah, it's
fair enough.
And hopefully the virtual bus tours are going to even get into this more. And I think you'll be interested when we get those ready to go out. So those will be interesting to do.
Just a few advantages to having everything be virtual, and
exactly.
Bus tour, I will look forward to that. And Great. Then as far as the specific issue that Kathy raises, I'm sure I can at least let you know where we are in the process. We are in between the first and second reading.
Okay.
Usually that second reading is just a formality, and it just goes the way the first reading did. but it doesn't have to. Every time there's a vote, there's an opportunity for a discussion again and an opportunity to amend what was passed in the first reading. If that were to happen, it would start things over. It would be like another first reading, and then we'd have to vote again if it were to be changed right now. But as far as where we are right now, Kathy is absolutely right. It has passed that first reading, and it was changed to limit quite dramatically where these micro units could be. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, Cindy.
Thank you. There are a couple of other committee members that have their hands up or want to speak. So I think one of them is Priscilla, and then Ian, you can go after Priscilla if that works.
So Louise, I had two questions, and they're not directly related, but they're a little bit tied together. I mean, one is, are there communities, I apologize for putting you on the spot, but are there communities that you find particularly successful and inspirational around these issues of fair housing? That within Oregon in particular, but not necessarily, that we can look to as examples or take learnings from. So that was one question. And the second is, I'm a big believer in needs assessments, and having done a number of community health needs assessments for the state. But we also had a discipline after a needs assessment and identifying the needs assessment of coming up with scorecards to know how we were progressing against the needs we had identified. Do you have any templates, particularly around fair housing, or resources that we could look to for creating a scorecard or report card on how we're doing?
That's a great idea. Well, for the first one about communities that are doing a good job, everybody's struggling with this. I think Tigard's doing pretty well. I think you guys are. I mean, I'm amazed at what Ben's been able to accomplish, and it's pretty impressive. So I used to work for the city of Medford, and when Jim Long and I worked together a lot, and I was always so jealous because he was able to get things through in Bend that I wasn't able to get through in Medford on affordable housing and so on. So I think Ben's done an amazing job. I'll defer to Alan if you can think of any other communities. I know there's been a lot of work on these issues in Portland, and it's been a struggle. So
yeah, I sort of hate to say that, but I think that Portland, in lots of different ways, and I think what we recognize is that the dynamics are very different in a place like Portland than they are in a place like Bend or Salem or other places. But it doesn't mean that the concepts aren't somewhat the same. And what you saw in Portland was, they've actually been working on the middle housing question over the last 4 years. And it's been interesting to me to see the conversation really morph over those 4 years away from the original question into a question around providing more access to opportunity through middle housing, right? Originally, it started as this conversation about demolitions and McMansions that really got overtaken by how do we provide more opportunities around affordability and housing. And I think that's the same thing that drove then HB 2001, the middle housing bill at the state level. And so I think you can take some of those kinds of examples and move them and scale them into your community. And again, we don't know as much about the micro units piece, but it sounded like it could have been an opportunity along that spectrum, right? To actually think about one of those ways that we might provide opportunity or access to opportunity through affordability and housing for different members of our community. So I think we're seeing a lot of that as communities are embracing these concepts about what does it mean to create opportunity through housing affordability in so many different ways.
Yeah, I think Beaverton's done some good things too. There's people are all struggling with this, just like you are. In terms of the scorecard, I think that's great, and I'm thinking this might be something. Both Alan and Lynn are on these state committees with the housing production strategies and so on, and we're looking at really packing racial equity issues into these new legislation. And there might be that, to me, that would be a perfect area for scorecards. Yeah, to see how people are doing with that. I don't know if you have anything to add on that, Alan. We don't have a template or anything, but I think it's an incredible idea.
Yeah, I think you're right, Louise. I think it is an interesting opportunity and that one is actually House Bill 2003, this new report that's coming forward about housing production strategies. And as the name implies, one of the interesting pieces about it is it tends to only be a scorecard around the production of housing, right? So there are a lot of other elements that we also need to score, as it were. And it's interesting that in our housing planning ecosystem, that scoring doesn't exist, right? You would think that Goal 10 housing needs analyses might provide us those opportunities, but they really don't. So I think it is incumbent on local jurisdictions to understand what their community is asking about metrics and evaluation, and continue to move those forward and say, these are the goals and intentions we have, and we ought to be keeping track of whether or not we're meeting those at a local level. So the housing production strategy becomes one method at the state level for tracking the production of housing, which is one part of that formula, but it's not the whole picture. And especially it looks very different in every community. So local control of that becomes important.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you for that. And I want to allow time. Lynn has some things she wants to share during this meeting with a number of great progresses that the city has made in the last couple of years. I do know that Ian still has something to share, and I think Elizabeth had her hand up. So I wanted to get through the committee question and answers and be respectful of the time as well. So Ian, I'm going to give you the floor, and then Elizabeth, if you have something to add, or if you had your hand up, we can't really tell. And then Lynn, I would love to have you share some aspects of what the city is doing locally, because Louise and Alan, what you're saying, locally, Bend has been very successful in a lot of programs and paying attention to a lot of things that the community asks us to do, and feedback and surveys. So with that, Ian, what would you like to share or ask? Thank you for being so patient.
Yeah, and Cindy, thank you for actually stealing most of the lines from the first couple sentences I wanted to say. One of my favorite things about living in Bend and about being on this organization, this committee, is that the citizens of Bend are so involved. We have a lot of input. We have a lot of people provide public comment, and that I think that means a lot to our work. I think it speaks a lot to the support we have locally behind this kind of work that we do. I'm curious, I'd say anecdotally, this might be the most active and sort of involved participant discussion we've had on this committee in quite a long time. And so I'm curious, how can we keep this going, especially with the community at large? This is a community conversation, and this is a community equity issue. And I would love to hear from our committee, and I'd also put the question to staff, how can this conversation be amplified and broadened beyond just this meeting? This training is fantastic. How can this conversation about equity, and specifically the importance of what we do, is something Bend understands, but tying the importance of what we do to equity and to this story, to me, is a really critical long-term thing that we can do to set up housing in Bend, affordable housing in Bend for success long-term. And I'm curious what options we have to ask staff to work on that, or ask for resources to keep moving this forward and keep this conversation going.
Ian, thank you. I feel like that's the perfect segue to me. If you're okay, Cindy, okay. I think that expression was good. And Rachel's pulling up my little PowerPoint. I promise I will do my best to not drone on and on here. And
Cindy, really, I did not plan this. I'd like to know. I did not know this.
It was great.
Right,
No,
right.
it's all great. Yeah.
I might owe you a drink or something, Ian. I'm not sure, but thank you. Just really wanted to say thank you not only to Louise and Sam and Alan. Alan, it's a pleasure to have you on board today, but also to the folks who are out there in the audience watching us. I know we have quite a few folks on YouTube as well as attendees who aren't allowed to say anything yet, but we will get to you. So there's a lot of equity conversations happening in the city right now. Today, our focus is housing. But I felt like it was really important to talk a little bit about how we're putting our talk into action here. The purpose of this conversation that I'm, attempting to set up right now with all of us is to really allow for different learning and exploration for the staff and committees, to hear from the public ideas for what we could do differently and better, and ideally to hear from some of the voices that aren't yet involved in our housing program, and that we've been attempting to speak for quite a while. I think it's really exciting to see some new folks with virtual formats weighing in that haven't testified before. So Rachel, can you go forward in the slide, please? So land use and equity, as you just learned, are very intertwined, and equity cannot be achieved through segregation. So here's the outline of what I'm going to talk about quickly. So I wanted to first focus on the additional housing types that Bend has been working to legalize here over the years, starting way back during my predecessor's time, Jim Long. We made some very good decisions around ADUs to allow those to more easily be developed. And as soon as we removed the conditional use permit from ADUs, the production doubled almost overnight from year to year. We have cottages, and we've actually gone back, as this committee knows, to redo that code and make it even more functional. We have duplexes and triplexes allowed in our standard residential district. And even before House Bill 2001 came about, council had set the goal of allowing fourplexes in our standard residential zone. So that work is underway. We kind of held tight a little bit because of the state level work and wanting to make sure that what we put forward with the fourplex push was going to work in alignment with the state before we got too far down the road. But that work is actively starting. As you know, we've allowed small unit developments and micro units. Small unit developments are kind of akin to tiny homes, so that's pretty exciting. We also had a mobile home park closure ordinance implemented way back in the mid 2000s, even before the state acted. And so that's another way of preserving, I guess, a different type of housing type. We have several funds that we use to incentivize and develop affordable housing. We have our own affordable housing fund. Most of you know that we were the first in the state to create that, and we're able to put out about $1 million a year in recent years through that program. We also recently created, and this committee was instrumental in this, an urban renewal, or TIF, affordable housing program, which benefited a development already or it's set up to benefit a development in one of our urban renewal areas that is affordable housing. And then of course, CDBG funds that are federal funds. And that's what Louise referenced with the Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing, or what we call AFFH, because you can't really do housing without acronyms. Sometimes I think that. We also have created some really good priority for true subsidized affordable housing. We have voluntary affordable housing agreements in many of our UGB expansion areas. So landowners came to us and offered up affordable housing in order to be able to come into the UGB. And so with that, in addition, we also prioritize staff time towards those UGB expansion areas that were most likely to produce additional housing. Supply of housing is a massive issue in Bend. That's why we're seeing $100,000 in 2 months price increase in our for sale product right now on the market. And so creating more housing is vital to help stabilize those prices and make sure that some of our existing folks can stick around here and continue to work and play in Bend. We've allowed for reduced parking, additional height, and a density bonus for affordable housing. We have a surplus land program that goes to affordable housing at the city's cost, which is a huge benefit to developers who can make that land work. We offer full SDC exemptions. You all saw that in action today. We expedite the permitting process, and we also have property tax exemptions in place for affordable housing. For folks who want some follow-up and homework after this meeting, I wanted to mention a couple of documents that are out there. Many of these can be found on the City of Bend's affordable housing website, which is bendoregon.gov/affordable housing. The first is the analysis of impediments to fair housing, and that is a few years old. That is part of the AFFH duty that we have in retaining CDBG funding, and really analyzes demographic trends and sort of what the possibilities are, as well as some potential limitations in Bend for fair housing access. We have the TSP, the Transportation System Plan, which also has an equity component in it, and that's pretty exciting. We have various and miscellaneous documents related to annual funding or federal funding. Many of those are on the website. You guys recently reviewed the CAPER, that's one of them. In addition, Council recently voted to create a Human Rights and Equity Commission. So I'm very excited to see how that comes to be and what work they may have in front of them, and hope that this group, the committee, can intersect with that commission. We do regular fair housing training. Thank you, Louise, Sam, and Alan. We hope to continue to have you, even though, Louise, I understand you're on to fair skies in the near future. But we hope that you still come and visit us every once in a while. And we also have a really amazing accessibility manager on staff who's able to help the community with accessibility needs, specifically around housing as well. She also can she often sits in on pre-app discussions and gives some advice, not just sort of the legal side of it, but really sort of the practical side of how to ensure that your buildings are accessible to the general public. And so that's a wonderful resource. I want to talk, and then the last thing is we will be sending out a survey. Everybody who's on this Zoom call will receive it. I think you all typed in your email at the beginning. It'll be pretty simple, but if we don't get to your comments, know that you will have the opportunity to complete that survey at a later point. So Rachel, go ahead and forward. So this is what our production of affordable housing looks like in Bend. This map is a little bit out of date, but not substantially. And you, after listening to the presentation that you just had, I think may look at this with slightly different eyes. This does not identify which properties are single family versus multifamily. And so there's a little bit less information. It just got too cluttered when we tried to do that kind of thing. But please do take a look at this. And this is publicly available on the City of Bend's mapping program, which is called BOOM, again, another acronym. If you type in BOOM, Bend, Oregon, you will probably come to our sort of mapping page, and there's something called the Affordable Housing Viewer on there. And this is what you'll see. You can click on each of these little bubbles and see some more information about each of the developments and learn about that. We do try to protect to the best of our ability some of the homeowners and things like that that did use our subsidy. So you won't be able to drill down to the actual tax lot, but it is there to give you an idea of the types and concepts behind some of the funding we've done. So wanted to next sort of open it up to the community to speak a little. I know we already have a couple of hands raised. So with that, a couple of sort of overarching rules, if that's okay. The first is if you want to speak, please raise your hand. Hopefully you can see that down at the bottom of your screen, I believe, for everybody. Just click on that button and a little hand will go up next to you. Cindy and I both seem to be having issues with seeing hands. So I appreciate committee members when you've been typing stuff into chat. That is helpful just to make sure that we're able to see folks that have their hands up. AHAC members, Affordable Housing Committee members and staff, I would very much appreciate if you all would listen. I'm going to do my best to do this as well, to whatever the community says. Our best listening happens when we let go of the urge to correct or to add something to what somebody's saying. I think this is a great opportunity for us to hear from our community. And so I would just ask you to listen if possible. Please, members of the public, speak your truth as concisely as possible. We do have a few other business items in this meeting, but really want to be sure that we hear from you. And then if you are acting under personal attacks or anything like that, we're either going to mute you or we're going to remove you from the meeting. So I just want to make that clear as well. So Rachel, go ahead and advance. So here are a handful of possible questions you can answer. These are just a handful of topics. Feel free to let us know what you think about the work that the committee is doing. And I think, Ian, your questions are really well within here. What additional education, what conversations do we need? And also, where should the city's housing program go from here? So with that, Cindy, if it's okay, it looks like we have Heather with a question and then a handful of attendees after that.
And I have figured out where to find the hand raise. So I do have access to that. We'll have Heather go first, and then I'm just going to go down the list of the hand raises, and I'll call your name and you can unmute yourself if that is the case, and then we'll go from there. And thank you, Lynn, for your recap. There has been a lot of accomplishments on the committee just since I've been on I think I've been on 3 years now. It's just really exciting to see what we've been able to do, and I'm looking forward to continuing our momentum. There's a lot that we can do in the future too. So thank you again for all of that input. So Heather, yes?
The people in the audience will have to be unmuted by us.
Oh, okay. Thank you. So then I'll call, so do you want me to call the name so you know who to unmute?
Yeah, once we get there, go ahead with Heather, and then once you do that, either Rachel or I will unmute.
Okay, so Lynn mentioned Heather. I don't have your last name, but Heather, you have the floor.
Great, thank you. So my question is sort of going back to the micro units, and I think it ties into the first, second, and third question bullets here for discussion. Just using the micro units as a use case, if you will. I'm interested in, what is the city interested in having a discussion with us about their thinking around how the direction they're going with the micro units? So, I think it'd be nice to better understand what they're considering, what's sort of behind the direction they're leading in the second reading, and then really to engage the community a little bit more about the need for diverse housing, certainly beyond just residential commercial. So just, I think this is a good use case to have these sorts of equity conversations around what's happening in Bend right now.
Well, I think that might be best coming from one of the counselors on the call. I don't know if either of you would like to speak to that.
And I don't mean to put anyone on the spot in this moment.
And now I'm looking to see if
I'm happy to do so.
Yeah,
okay,
thank you.
Thank you, Justin.
Yeah, so I think for me, and because really probably the most challenging piece of being a counselor is that we really take input in from all sorts of diverse groups, including you guys. And having been on the committee previously, I know how important and passionate people on the committee are about affordable housing, subsidized housing, but really just making Bend more affordable in general for everybody, not whether it's subsidized or not, but really having affordable by design. Now, that said, we also have had, between Planning Commission and Neighborhood Leadership Alliance, there were some competing, commentary and concerns. And one thing I'll say, when I was on the committee, and a lot of the things that Lynn mentioned was when I was on the committee, we kind of put forward, there was 5 kind of key things that we started and started additional housing types. And a lot of these things we don't always end up where we want to be initially. And sometimes they do happen incrementally because you have to get community buy-in. And to get the community accepting some of these housing types, sometimes you got to start small and then you can change things. You guys have been involved with, readjusting. I think since I've been on council, we've gone back into the ADU code at least twice. We've gone back into cottage development. When I was on the committee when the cottage development passed, and nobody was using it. And so that was one of my questions to one of our local builders, saying, why, you guys kind of do some of this stuff and these products, why aren't you building it? And, so we got feedback, and I think we've gone back and, realized that, hey, maybe we put some, hurdles in the initial code package. But the initial code package got passed. We were able to adapt it. And I think a lot of times, people, whether, it's, people in the community, sometimes council, sometimes staff, kind of look at the development code as gospel. I don't see it that way. And the development code is easily changed. And if we come to see that these, either aren't working or we need to make modifications or they become readily acceptable by the broader community, I think it's worth looking and reevaluating. And I think some of the concerns is that if you just kind of let it go, because, I don't think anybody's advocating for a scenario like Houston. You just do whatever you want, wherever you want, however you want to do it. No zoning at all. And I don't think anybody's advocating for that. We still have Oregon's land use system. Because if we were, I would be advocating for EFU to be outlawed initially to make our urban growth boundary expandable easier. But what I really think, sometimes these things have to be done incrementally. And so I think it's its first step. It's a good first step. Let's see how it goes. And then as we get community buy-in, people realize, hey, these really aren't that bad. And can we remove other barriers? There's other barriers to, this housing type that needs to be, addressed. SDCs is one of them. I have real concerns, that these won't get built at all. I mean, because the cost drivers are too high to actually build them. And, I know people have been putting out this map, and I think Kathy alluded to it a little bit, the map of where RS is versus RM and RH in the city. Well, there was another map that we were presented on Wednesday that really tells a better story. And it's where are the undeveloped lots? Because I really don't see, I think, I think at least out in the public, I've seen Kathy make these comments as well. I don't see somebody tearing down an existing structure to put a micro unit development. So what you'll probably see is you'll see vacant land. And when you started looking at what lots are vacant, it's a lot, the disparity is not nearly as bad. And the acreage of land that's available for new development, not for redevelopment, it makes a big difference. And to me, that tells a better story, and it's a lot more equitable. We didn't, I know that there were some people that wanted to limit these to a specific area of the city. I think that would not have been right. So we didn't do that. And I think, this will be, micro units will be something we'll look at and evaluate, see how they're going. And, we'll reevaluate it in the future. And if we need to make changes, then we'll make them. I hope that answered your question, Heather.
Yes, thank you. And just real quick, any concerns about the presentation we just heard with fair housing rules? And is there no concern?
No, we addressed that during our hearing, and Lynn made comment, and then also City Attorney Barry Winters made comment. And staff, I trust our legal department, and Lynn's an attorney, so I think she knows the law, as well as anybody. And there were no concerns from legal, and so I'm going to go with that opinion.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Justin. I would like to call on the next person with their hand raised. It's Karna Gustafson. Karna, you're up. Thank you for your patience.
No problem. So I don't know if this was addressed initially when they were talking about the micro units. It's not just in the mixed use employment, it's also in RM and RH, which is where other multifamilies are allowed. So I didn't know if that had been clarified. The next thing I would like to address is the Neighborhood Leadership Alliance, I understand, has been putting forth some proposals and changes to our land use system, increasing the distance from 250 feet to 500 feet of notice, additional lengthy notice periods, for the neighborhood meeting, of which state law doesn't even require a neighborhood meeting. I have some concerns just based on the presentation I just heard, which was absolutely excellent. Thank you for Louise and Sam and Alan. That was absolutely great. I do have some concerns because I feel like the proposals are really close to a NIMBY argument of we're trying to delay these projects from moving forward. In addition, the excess cost that all these additional notices, which are going to be absorbed by the developer, as well as delay. And the more delay that, of course, they have construction loans and they have interest they have to pay. And the more delay, the more costly projects are. So I just was interested in hearing maybe from Louise or others on what they thought if those types of things are happening in other jurisdictions and whether they kind of get a little bit towards the NIMBY argument. Thank you.
Well, I'll respond briefly. Mainly, yes, it's something we would red flag, but only if they were saying, well, if it's affordable housing or some other project, like an affordable housing project, if they were only acting saying we want more time on those or we want more notice or whatever. But if it's for everybody, then I don't think it's not a fair housing issues per se. But you're absolutely right. It does add to the cost of all of the development, very much so. And if it's an affordable housing development, it's going to make it much more costly. So again, it's not, it's a situation where it would depend on what's going on. But as I understand it, when I looked at those, the changes that were being recommended, it was for all development. It wasn't just for affordable housing development. Is that right, Lynn?
It's actually typically for larger developments such as multifamily. So single family does not have to go through this process.
Well, that might be a fair housing issue then. Yeah, I don't know.
Karna, thank you for that. That is good information for us to, maybe we could gather your concerns and keep them in the discussions that we're going to have moving forward. Those are good points and well received. I took a couple notes, so thank you for that, Karna.
No problem.
So the next hand raised is Moe Newbold.
Hi, my name is Moe Newbold. I'm the Director of Urban Planning for Central Oregon Land Watch, which is a local environment and land use advocacy nonprofit. So I guess I raised my hand way back during the presentation when I had a question. But so one thing that I've been concerned about, and I have a question for the folks who know a lot about fair housing, is with our new tax increment financing district that's just been created in the core area, of course, like we definitely don't want to do harm to vulnerable populations. And we don't want to displace people of color. However, there is a large community, like for Bend, it is a larger community of color living in that area and adjacent. And my understanding is that with the Fair Housing Act, you have to be like completely race blind. But I feel that when this redevelopment is happening, we're going to need to do special outreach and special programs to help people of color stay in the neighborhood. And so I'm wondering how those two things can mesh. Like I understand that fair housing applies when you're building something new, but what about when you're trying to help a community stay in place?
So, Alan, are you still on? Would you like to take that one? Because I mean, Portland's been dealing with just that. Mainly fair housing applies in all situations. And if a community is changing or gentrifying and people are being displaced, yeah, fair housing would come into play. So I don't know what else to add there.
Well, can you do anything proactively? Like if apartment buildings are being built, then encourage reaching out to people of color, the communities that are.
Oh, definitely. You can do outreach to people that are in the community already and existing members and let them know. Yeah.
I'm here, Louise.
Oh, good.
I just got unmuted. Yeah, thanks for the question. And, one of the things that's interesting for us in the fair housing movement, is exactly what you're talking about, is trying to unravel this history that we heard about today. You know, the roots of the Fair Housing Act are deeply rooted in racial segregation, and particularly in black-white segregation in the mid part of the 20th century. Yet, like many civil rights laws, it asks us to essentially be colorblind, that everyone is treated equally under the law. And what it might prevent us from doing is creating situations where we're actually bringing justice in the housing context, because the inequities exist so at such a high level. So it becomes a real question from a fair housing perspective. What can we do? And I think what you're exactly talking about is the real question. You know, can we create preferences based on race, based on need? And the answer in the fair housing world is it's very difficult. It's a very difficult needle to thread, frankly. It doesn't mean that it's impossible. And we've seen it in some places, in particularly urban settings where you have a displacement of, in those instances, Black African-American neighborhoods, right? Where you can show things like either a substantial need, or that these actions would not, for instance, increase segregation, right? That if you were to preference members of the Black community, that you wouldn't actually be increasing racial segregation, because you're talking about folks who have been displaced from an area. So, the overriding framework is exactly what you said, that race in the housing context can cause a fair housing issue. But there also are some policy considerations, some legal considerations to look at to potentially meet those policy objectives. But they're very, very, as I said, tight needles to thread. But I think they're worth looking at for communities that are experiencing that dynamic. And again, especially as you said, communities of color that are facing displacement, and they really need to become considerations as you are developing your communities and those dynamics are occurring. But there are no easy answers or good answers under the Fair Housing Act, unfortunately. But there are some examples out there.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's something I'd like Ben to look into as we move forward. And then if I could just add a quick public comment additionally. Ben has obviously made so many great strides towards allowing ADUs, allowing plexes and cottage developments, and increasing the number of units. And I know that also the Affordable Housing Committee has granted a lot of funds to develop affordable housing. But my concern is, our local economy mirrors the national economy, where wealth inequity is just so drastic that I am losing hope that there can really be a market solution, because when the top 2% can afford to invest in housing as an investment, and in a lot of cases vacation homes or second homes, then that just doesn't create a market that really works for the rest of most of the rest of the folks on the lower income scale. So that, I think, looking at it from a larger picture, that's, I think, also something that Bend is going to need to wrestle with to really solve this problem in the coming years.
Thank you, Moe. Okay, next I have Malachi Brown. You're back. Are you there, Malachi?
I'm sorry, can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
There we go. I was just talking to myself apparently. But this is more of a comment going out to Luis, Sam, and Alan, all the community members, all the city staff that are presenting and conversating at this time. This is my time attending something like this, virtual or face to face. I don't know what a microtransaction is. I have no understanding of half of the things that we talked about today. I gained the knowledge and experience and knowing the things that are going on in my town, but as a for the last 20 years of my life. I'm only 20. You know, I really thrive to see what's going on in the community, and try to be a proactive part of it. But my comment really comes across as a veteran. I know to go out and just walk around for my service without having to you know, look for it. I want to be here to tell you guys thank you. You guys don't just go out and get greeted and appreciated by the people of the community that you guys watching, you guys conversate and seeing the slideshow, seeing the history that that Louise, Sam, and Alan all presented. I wanted to appreciate you guys verbally. I wish I could do it personally, but definitely thank you to attend more of these in the future. Absolutely.
Malachi, I hope you'll come back in the future too.
I could be a positive energy sometimes, but I definitely have the desire to build the knowledge in what you guys do and how you guys do it. And I love helping people. I've always appreciated the people here in Central Oregon and open arms and the open arms attitude of the community. But I do see a growing population, not just population in general, but ethnic population. And it can provide its challenges, it can provide its benefits, and not everybody knows how to handle those challenges and benefits. You guys seem very open and honest about, you know, how to handle those challenges. And I love seeing that in a community, and especially in the leadership aspect of the community. And I want to appreciate you guys for that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Malachi. You're welcome to our meetings anytime, so please feel free to attend. All right, next I have Karen Morris.
Hello, this is Karen Morris. I am the City of Bend's Accessibility Manager. So thank you, Lynn, for your nice little statement about me earlier. I definitely oversee, I am the staff liaison for the City of Bend's Accessibility Advisory Committee, and also sit on, you know, the State Independent Living Council. And so I have a lot of fingers personally and professionally related to accessibility. And housing nationwide is a pretty significant concern in the accessibility world. The bare minimums are the bare minimums, and that's a lot of times, unfortunately, what developers tend to go to. And the requirements are mainly only in multifamily housing, and a lot of people have co-occurring disabilities that sometimes make that kind of living environment not exactly the best for them. So, you know, the increased need, it's getting to be dinner time, so dogs will be talking to me. The increased need for accessible housing, I think you guys have done a great job on getting the ADUs and getting different types of housing in different situations built. I just wonder, do we have any, is the city tracking those developments in regards to how long accessory dwellings, or if accessory dwelling units are actually being offered at an accessible cost? And if in any of them, are they actually accessible? And accessibility means something different to each person with a disability. It's not just physical people in wheelchairs, though that is the group that tends to have the biggest challenge finding housing. I have committee members who, whenever it's time to try to locate a new place to live, has a pretty significant limitation on where they can go and what they're going to be able to, what they're going to have to do to the place, because no place generally is going to meet every single need. So it's a concern that I think needs to be heightened above just the typical minimum legal standards of what is required. Having diversity in a community, I believe, benefits every single person, and whether that be income, economic, racial, religious, and ability diversity is key. Let's have our community reflect our community and not have pockets of places where typically you only see one type of person or one. So again, it's just my constant call for that need of getting, how we can get our community, where should the housing program go? Maybe start looking at what kind of, can we create some additional accessibility requirements or enhance that from developers? That would be an interesting topic to look at. So that's all. Thank you again.
Thank you, Karen. I think we do track some of the ADUs that have gone under construction and track the number. I think Lynn may be able to answer that a little more clear, but real quickly, I just wanted to check in. It's 5 o'clock. We've got a couple more people that want to comment, and I just am asking the committee if they can stay for a few more minutes to hear these last commenters and stick around. So hopefully you can, but let me know if anyone has to leave, just let us know. But if you can stick around, that would be great.
I can stay.
Me too.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much. Lynn, would you like to try to answer Karen's question a little better than I did with tracking it? And then we can go to the last couple of public comment people that are waiting.
Yeah, I'm not aware of us tracking sort of the level at which they're rented or sold. I do know that we look at the units, and I'm also not sure about accessibility, but that may be tracked through building in some way. So Karen, I'll follow up with our Office of Performance Management, OPM, and see what we have and if that's feasible to track or not. So thank you.
Great, thank you very much. All right, next I have, if I say your name wrong, my apologies, Paula Latassa.
Hi, yes, it was close, Latassa. Thank you, and I appreciated all the presentations today. My question is really about what the definition of affordability is, and if whether or not we're looking at putting energy efficiency and conservation efficiency requirements into affordable housing. Because if you're not, what we're doing is what I've seen a lot of in my career is people building cheap houses or cheaper houses that require a lot of energy to operate, or have great big yards that need, or I shouldn't say great big yards, but big yards with a lot of grass and things that cost a lot of money to operate. And so maybe the mortgage or the rent is less, but the monthly operating cost really offsets the benefits to building affordable housing if you're not putting energy efficiency and conservation into the equation.
Paula,
tackle that.
That's a great question. And Lynn's going to tackle that. I have an idea of what the answer is, but Lynn, go ahead. You'll like the answer, I think, Paula.
Good.
Yeah, Paula, thank you for that question. Definitely. We do a lot of work in the affordable housing program with different sorts of efficiencies. So I know we have actually two folks on the call right now who have developed with us recently, both of whom are aiming for net zero on their buildings. So that's actually outpacing a lot of the market development that's happening in town. And I am not aware of any developments that have not in some way taken advantage of an energy efficiency upgrade of some sort. In Bend recently, affordable developments. I want to make that clear. So anything that we put money into that I know of has some form of energy upgrades attached. That level is different, and it really often depends on what sorts of programs are out there to incentivize it, because sort of the way subsidized housing works is that you can only pay for a portion of it with traditional methods, and the rest you have to fundraise for. You cannot make up the cost of developing a home in Bend without subsidy if you want to keep it at a lower rent or for sale value. So, so they are looking out there for incentives. The state has some really great ones, as do a couple of different groups around the state that can contribute as well. And then we have a number of folks who just have taken it upon themselves because it's something they believe in, to do really amazing work in that realm. So I agree with you. That's something that we look at. It does lower operating costs considerably when folks are reducing their energy consumption in a variety of different ways. So thank you.
Great. Can I have a quick follow-up question? So if somebody had a different program or policies that might benefit the community, who would be the best person to approach that with?
Probably me.
Cool. That's what
And
I
you can find my email address on the website. That's the best way to reach me these days.
Terrific. Thank you.
Thank you, Paula. All right. Last but not least, the last hand I see is Jody Howe.
Hi, thank you, everyone. Paula, you took my questions, but I think I can add to it. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. My concern was around the total cost of renting that includes energy bills. I have been in the energy business since about 2009 and probably earlier than that, but currently focus on assistance in utility programs that really are now seeing a big problem with people not being able to afford just the energy use of their homes because they are poorly built. And when Justin had mentioned something about, well, they don't see anybody tearing down buildings to build new, that would be one consideration that you really might want to revisit, in the sense that the older properties that might be out there take so much more to try to retrofit and re-energize than having people continue to rent these places that just truly do burn energy. I mean, it's kind of taking what you guys do, putting it with the city climate action plan and the accessibility that Karen was talking about earlier, and look towards building for the affordable people, low-income people, disabled people, and even the elderly, which all need all those parts. And if everything is a bare minimum, I mean, I don't know what benefits the actual developers are bringing with them. You did mention that you had 2 developers there that are looking at net zero, and I think that's fantastic. But I know there's a lot of developers like that come in from Portland and have kind of taken advantage of some of the offerings that the city will give for low income or affordable housing, but then don't really follow through. So I don't know how you will all ensure more of this energy efficiency into your buildings, like well-written documents and clear parameters for what it really means when you drill down what really affordability is for your projects. And with that too, you guys have done a great job. All your presentations have been extremely thorough. Sadly, hearing the history of Oregon, it's always kind of a bit of a emotional thing for me, but thank you for doing your work.
Thank you, Jody. Lynn, did you have anything to add to that?
I don't. It looks like we have Amy on. We still with a hand raised, and that is one of our net zero folks. So maybe she has something to say.
Yes.
That's okay, Cindy.
No, that would be great. No, I just didn't switch screens. I did want to, some of these projects that are coming through and being built are very high energy efficient. It does add to the cost up front, but then the long-term gain, it can pencil out. It just takes a bit of time. But Amy, I will let you have the floor if you would like to contribute an answer for Jody. Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yep. Okay, good. I just wanted to bounce off Moe's comment and say that Cora is currently looking at a community preference policy. This is something that came to our attention because the community land trust in Seattle and the one in Portland, Proud Ground, both use this, and it's actually not a policy that started with the land trust, but it's a citywide city policy that was created to address gentrification. So basically the way it works is that if someone has either current or generational even roots to a particular community, then they have preference to the affordable housing that's going in there. So it might be something to examine further as the city, as you know, influencing as a city policy.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're going to be hearing from you here really soon, but Lynn.
So Cindy, I have some new info.
Yeah.
We've been doing a little work behind the scenes because we are over. Both of our last two folks, John Gilbert and Amy Warren, have agreed to hold tight so that you all can go home and enjoy some time with your families. So we don't need to tackle those two things today. If it's okay with folks, I'll go through a handful of items for the staff report just to let you know what's upcoming in case AHEC members want to participate. Is that okay?
Thank you very much. And that's okay with me.
And many, many thanks to Amy Warren and John Gilbert, both of whom have been on this call for quite a while and hanging tight. I think we felt like it was really important to hear from the community on these topics. And so really appreciate those members who are able to stay and also the audience members who are still with us. So very quickly, those who are interested in equity around policing, there's a listening session this weekend from Saturday from 9 to noon. There's information on the city website. If you go to our homepage, bendoregon.gov, and scroll down, there's a calendar, and that'll show you how to get on board. Council has a committee check-in. This is a quarterly goals update on Monday. That's taking place from 4 to 6, and it will be a big update on the road to 3,000. That was the goal that council set, to get 3,000 residential units on the ground this biennium. Affordable housing will be part of that. I think you all may be interested. You can watch on YouTube as well as Zoom, and that will be on the calendar as well. So Monday, 4 to 6. We have a work session coming up on the 21st with council around homelessness that folks might be interested in. I think we're slated for about an hour. And so that's also a hot topic that this committee doesn't often intersect with, but I thought there might be some interest out there. So keep an eye out for that agenda. That'll be on October 21st, attached to the regular council meeting, most likely starting at 5. We have a couple of upcoming code work sessions at Planning Commission. Kathy Austin has generously offered to be there. Again, folks are more than welcome to tune in and watch if you are interested. The NLA changes that were mentioned today will happen on the 26th of this month. And there's some information on Juniper Ridge to happen on November 9th. So anyone on the committee can email me for more information as we get closer. I can provide you with official agendas, et cetera. And again, that's all on the calendar at the city website. We have an RFP training. Most of you hopefully saw the media around our funding applications being open. Here we go again. For those of you who are new on the committee, I think Cindy and I are going to try to find a time to meet with you separately, give you an overview, make sure you're ready to go. But there is an RFP training or sort of Q&A session with Rachel for potential applicants on the 22nd from 3 to 4:30. And then the RFPs are due on November 4th, which is a Monday. So that's a little different. Often we request them on a Friday. So just get out, close of business, which for us is 5 o'clock.
Hey, Lynn, that's November 2nd.
Oh, I'm so sorry. How did I get that wrong? Thanks for jumping in, Rachel. Geez. Yeah. Too Many details. House Bill 2001 is out there. Alan and I are both participating on the rulemaking committee for that. That's a state bill to allow this missing middle housing in communities. And rulemaking is coming to a close for House Bill 2001. So they intend to make a decision at the DLCD Governing Commission, which another acronym, LCDC, is the name of the commission. They're going to make a decision, I believe, on the 13th. And so public comment is open until then. If you have any trouble finding that information and want to make a comment, just let me know and I'll show you where the website is. And we'll have to talk about this. Our next meeting date, AHAC meeting date, is in November, is actually on Veterans Day, which is a holiday. So what I was going to tell you was to go forth, enjoy your day, celebrate those who have served, all of us. But I think with the sort of extended agenda today, we'll probably have to do some powwowing and figure out an alternate day to meet. We cannot move it to another Wednesday because council is taking up the 2 viable Wednesdays, and then Thanksgiving week is the final one. And if you are anything like me, my Thanksgiving sometimes starts the night before with cooking and whatnot. So want to make sure that everybody has time for that as well. So we stay tuned, I guess, and we'll try to figure out a good alternate time to get any remaining issues answered. Just wanted to say thank you all so much for this discussion. I think that was really wonderful. I appreciate the public participation on this. That was great as well. I very much hope that you all will complete the survey and give us additional ideas for what we could be doing better or differently in the future. Ian, I have not forgotten your comment about having additional conversations about this, and hopefully we can arrange for that in the future. And just thank you all for your time and energy on that.
I'm going to ask again next meeting, Lynn.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Lynn and Rachel, for all your work. And Louise and Sam, thank you again if you're still with us.
Still with you. We'll get ready to
we
go.
all appreciate it. Yeah, I think we
Very
all
interesting.
Yes. Thank you. If there's no additional comments, I will adjourn the meeting.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thanks so much.
All right. Have a good night, everyone. Thank you for your extra time.
Have a good evening.
Thanks all. Be well. Bye.